You're listening to the Three Seeds Podcast, a show about native plants in the Midwest. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Elizabeth, and we've been walking around parks and gardens together for years.
In each show, we share interesting and fascinating facts about native plants.
Why 3 seeds? Well, we believe it takes 3 seeds to germinate great ideas.
We're 2 of the 3 seeds, and the third may very well be a plant, a person, or a cultivar.
Oh, no.
Welcome back, everybody. We are here with Stuart Wagenius, who is a plant conservation scientist, and we're coincidentally in the Plant Conservation Science building of the Chicago Botanic Garden. Stuart runs something called the Echinacea Project, and we are super excited to talk to him.
Thanks for joining us.
Hey, I'm excited to be here.
Stuart, our first big question for you is, what is plant conservation science? That would probably be a good starter.
Well, let's see. You know what plants are. Your listeners will know what plants are. Probably know what science is. So what is conservation? So there's lots of habitats. It's sometimes about plants, but often it's about habitats that we're really excited about because they're rare or special or valuable in some way. So there are these special habitats that have amazing diversity of plants, like all kinds of different plants that flower early in the spring, late in the fall, summer long, and insects and other animals. So those are cool places. So we want to conserve them. We want to manage them so the plants and animals don't go extinct. We want to manage them so they're healthy, so they're safe to go to. And so conservation science is about learning the best ways to conserve our special habitats. Doing it smart, doing it inexpensive, and just doing it well. So that's my job, is figuring out ways that we can manage these special native habitats so that they'll persist for the next generation.
What is the Echinacea Project?
Oh, the Echinacea Project is a conservation science initiative where we are trying to learn about the ecological and evolutionary processes of plants and insects in fragmented prairie habitat. So prairies used to be vast, but now they've mostly been converted to agriculture, corn and soybeans, but there are these little patches of prairie left. And so we call that like a fragmented habitat. The little fragments that are left are usually small, but they're amazing. They're isolated, and they're really cool to visit. So the Echinacea Project, we try and learn what's happening to the plants and animals that live in these new circumstances. Small patches of habitat and isolated patches of habitat, and they face all sorts of threats. We can divide those threats into like ecological threats and evolutionary threats. So like evolutionary threats are like, inbreeding depression. Do you know what inbreeding depression is?
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Tell us more.
Okay, so inbreeding is when relatives mate, like the European aristocracy. They had all sorts of issues,
Yep.
Yeah, well, plants have the same thing. If they are all isolated from other groups, you end up having relations between related plants, and plants then become not healthy. The next generation faces issues, and they're more likely to go extinct. So that's bad.
And what are some of the issues, since plants don't have toes, for example? They can't have like 11 toes.
Yeah, they just might not be able to grow. They might not be able to produce leaves that are the right shape or size. They may not have the right pigmentation. That's kind of like being albino in people. We usually don't focus on like particular syndromes in plants. We just see how healthy they are. Like, do they survive and do they flower? And inbred plants tend to die more.
So that's the depression. It's the depression of the population.
Yeah. Depressed fitness, yeah. So in biology they call it fitness. Darwin called it fitness. Survival of the fittest, yeah. Well, inbreds tend not to be very fit. Yeah.
So where are you doing this research?
So our research is based in western Minnesota, Douglas County. It's an area that's like on the edge of the prairie It's pretty hilly, so there's some areas that are too steep to bring in a tractor. So there's still some native prairie patches out there, but it's mostly corn and soybeans. But those like hillsides, there's little corners of land that just the farmer couldn't plow up, and so those are our little prairie remnants.
And it's called the Echinacea Project because you're focusing on echinacea plants, or?
That's right. There's a species of Echinacea purple coneflower that grows west of the Mississippi River, and we focus on that one. Not because it's rare or endangered, it's actually common and widespread. We use it as a model organism, kind of like a white rat for humans. Yeah.
And how long have you been studying it?
So I started grad school in...
Oh, whoa.
Yeah, it was a while ago. When I started grad school in the mid-90s, I wanted to pick a common species. I also wanted to pick one that was like easy to spot. And so purple coneflower flowers in the middle of summer, and kind of at that time it flowers above the grasses. So back in '95, I went and I found a bunch of these purple coneflower plants growing in small prairie remnants, and I tagged them, and they were all flowering, maybe a couple hundred. And then I went back the next year, and I couldn't find all the tags, but I found all the plants. Most of them were not flowering. They just had leaves, but they had sprouted from a taproot. They each have a taproot that goes like straight down, and I've learned since then, very deep. But they have green leaves that come out every year, but they don't flower every year. So the third year I went back, and again, almost all of them were alive. Few were flowering, but there was this one site. There was one half of a Nature Conservancy prairie preserve where a lot of the plants were flowering. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Now, most of the time when this coneflower species flowers, it produces one head. So a lot of leaves, one stem, and one head. But this one spot in 1998, they produced multiple heads. A lot of them produced multiple heads. I was like, whoa, that's interesting. I've done these observations every year, and most of the time, these plants survive, but they don't flower all the time. That one place I learned afterwards where the flowering was so high, it was burned that spring. They did the Nature Conservancy did a prescribed burn that spring, and that summer, like a whole bunch of them flowered. Oh, that was interesting.
And that was 1998.
Yeah.
And we're in 2024.
Yes. Way to
So
go.
have you been studying this?
Oh, yeah.
Since then?
I have. So some of those individual plants that I tagged in 1995 were still alive in 2023.
Alive, and some were alive and some were thriving.
Yeah, most of them, I mean, if they've made it this long, they're still alive and thriving. Some of them are flowering and some of them didn't flower.
Does flowering mean thriving or no?
Well, that's a great question. Let's see, I think these plants are in it for the long haul. There's a lot of competition. Prairies are renowned for their really dense roots. Tons of plants competing for limited resources, limited space, limited light. It's probably really hard for the plants to get enough oomph to flower every year. So these purple coneflower plants, probably synchronize their flowering to certain years. They probably can't do it every year. They just don't have enough power. Though if they were growing in a garden, they would flower every year, probably, most years.
But what you found really interesting as well was this burning and the effect of the burning, or was it a type of burn, or?
Yeah, well, that was kind of a mystery to us. Burning is not something that I did for a long time. You have to be very careful, you have to be trained, and I was working on other people's land. I was going to visit, Nature Conservancy, DNR, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they, for good reason, did not want me to light fire to
They don't
their
want you
preserves.
to set the prairie on fire.
No. But now that I have some people on my team who are skilled and experienced in burning, for the past few years we have been doing prescribed burns. So we've actually been able to experimentally learn the cause, if you burn, what happens. And it's really interesting.
What happens?
Well, plants do flower. If you burn in the spring, they do flower.
So, yeah, can Can you go into a little bit more about the reproductive lives of plants?
Sure, yeah, I can. Across the world, about half the species are self-fertile, meaning they can pollinate themselves, but about half are self-incompatible, meaning they need to get pollen from another individual. A lot of prairie plants are self-infertile. An individual plant needs to get pollen from another plant in order to produce seed. And so a given plant, like purple coneflower or like most of the grasses, a lot of plants will have both flowers that produce pollen and flowers that produce seed. But pollen from one plant needs to go to another plant to set seed.
So it's the mix?
It's the mix that matters.
Okay.
Yeah. So purple coneflower plant, one of those heads consists of about 150 florets, little flowers. And each flower can produce one seed. And each flower will produce pollen on one day, and then the next day it will produce what's called the style, or the part of the plant that's receptive to pollen. Okay, so the pollen grain has the sperm cell inside it. Okay, and the plant wants a bee to take that pollen away and put it on another plant. Now the female part of the plant, the style, also known as a stigma, is receptive to pollen. And it's kind of, well, it's kind of hairy and moist, and when pollen lands on it, the pollen grain will kind of crack open, and then a single, they call it a pollen foot, will grow into the style, and it'll grow all the way down to the ovule, which is, that's where the egg is, right? So that the sperm and egg come together, then you'll get an embryo.
Amazing.
It's just amazing that this is really similar to humans. I mean, obviously not exactly, but I had no idea.
Yeah, it's really similar.
Is this for all plants that are flowering?
Or
I mean, I realize the pollen part isn't necessarily the same, but is the whole going into the style all the way down to the ovule to the egg the same?
Yeah, that's pretty much how it works. I mean, there are
you
other
know that,
details.
Elizabeth?
No, not at all. I mean, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah. Oh, so there. Yeah. So it's interesting. So that's like the reproductive biology. That's what you learn in like health classes, like the biology. But there's a whole bunch of other aspects, like the bees. They're involved in this too. So the plant, do you know about bees?
Well, I mean, it sounds to me like the hope is that the bees will take it away from the plant, because this doesn't want to self-pollinate. So they would like it. Right, they would love to have this bee carrier, insect carriers, take it further afield so they don't have inbreeding depression.
Exactly.
You have so many flowers on the same plant. None of them can mix it up on the plant. All of those individual flowers and individual seeds, ovules, etc. Right? There's 150 ovules also?
Yep.
None of them are compatible with each other on the same flower head.
That's correct.
Okay.
So
Yes.
that works out well.
Yeah, so each one of those, each floret has to get pollen from another plant. So the pollen grains are full of nutrients, like protein. And so that serves as an enticement for the bee to come and collect it. The bees are collecting the food, or they're collecting the pollen to use as food for their young. The bee is a female, and she's collecting pollen to give to her offspring. She's taking the pollen and going to another plant to take more pollen.
It's sort of like a mad grocery run, just like going here, going there, and in the process, luckily, fertilizing other plants.
Yeah, lucky for the plant, unlucky for her, because that means she's dropping it, right? If she can get it all, then she'd take it all back to her nest. But she ends up dropping some. Like as she goes along, her legs, different bees carry it in different grocery baskets.
Some of those bees have little pollen pockets.
Some of them have pollen pockets, some have them on their legs. They're usually very hairy legs, so they keep it on their legs. Some of them have it on their abdomen, so lots of hairs on their abdomen. But the pollen grains will fall off. And so that's what happens. So if a bee is really good at collecting pollen and holding on to it, that's not good for the plant, but it's good for the bee.
Wait, are you saying some bees have that skill?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
it because of these pockets, or?
Oh yeah, they really
really
every
are
bee
pockets,
is
by
different.
the way.
That's crazy.
We have about 30 different species of bees that visit purple coneflower.
Okay.
And they're amazing. Like some of them are big, some of them are small, some of them are metallic green colored, and some are striped, and some are dull. It really varies a lot. And some of them are good pollinators, and some of them are not so good pollinators.
And I understand you're going to be heading out soon to go to the Echinacea Project sites.
Yep, we're going to head out to do our prescribed burns so we can learn about how fire affects all this pollination.
I do want to know a bit more. What do we know about how fire affects this pollination process?
Well, you know how we talked about the reproductive biology of the plants? Fire probably doesn't affect that at all. What fire affects is, who can mate with whom. It's like what we call the mating scene. So you guys have heard of dating, right?
What?
Dating? I'm so glad not to be dating, but yes, go ahead.
Okay, so dating, like when we were young, that's what people did. I don't think young people do that anymore. They have.
Yes, they do.
They do?
What are you talking
They
about?
go on dates?
Okay, by the way, Stuart has 2 daughters. I think he wants to put his head in the sand. But yeah, they go on dates.
Okay. Do they call them dates though?
I think your daughters would both be groaning right now.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Well, so what we did. So I'm a scientist. I try and be clever and engaging, and maybe it doesn't work. So there's the dating scene, which is like a human phenomenon of mating activity, right, or social interactions. So what we have in plants is the mating scene. Like you've heard of the dating scene, mating scene.
They just skip right past dating, go to mating. Mm-hmm. That's what you were trying to say.
That's what I was trying to say.
I think it's better out there than you think. But yes.
I don't know.
I think what you're saying is
bliss.
that
They skip the dating.
bees and plants are pretty straightforward.
Well,
Or fire.
Maybe they're less straightforward because people, you can get up, walk, or somehow find their mate. Plants are stuck. They've got roots. They have to enlist the help of pollinators. So it's a little bit indirect.
It is interesting, yeah. They're rooted down. They need help. Mm-hmm. It's hard to do a dating scene when you're stuck.
Yeah, so the bees are basically carrying their dates around.
Yeah,
or mates. They're mates.
Well, the mates stay put.
Okay, the mates are there.
Yeah.
Okay, they're literally carrying sperm around. This is like in-air IVF.
Aerial
IVF.
I like it.
That's mine. Thank you. 2024.
Metaphor cover.
Yeah. The mating scene is kind of a description of where the plants are, when they're flowering, and if they're compatible with each other. Okay? So kind of like a dating scene. Mm-hmm. Except we're scientists, so we want to define it quantitatively. We want to define it quantitatively. We want to be able to measure it and put it in a 3-dimensional mathematical structure, take all the fun out of it, and just quantify it. Mm-hmm. So for each plant, we want to know where they are. So we make a map, 2-dimensional map. We also want to know when they're participating in the mating. And so that's when they flower. What's their first date of flowering? Sometime in July. What's their last date of flowering? And so some plants flower a little on the early side, some plants flower a little on the late side. So this is when they participate. Some hit right in the peak, and that's like the best time to be flowering. So there's the where they are, when they are, and then compatibility. In order for a plant to set seed, it needs to get pollen from another plant, but not any old plant will do. if it's a related plant, they will reject that pollen. So they need a non-related plant to get the pollen from. Does that make sense?
How would they be related?
Well, if they're siblings or parent and offspring.
But I thought there was inbreeding depression. I thought it was possible.
Yeah, so it could be like cousins probably have issues, but half siblings have worse issues, and like full siblings would have really bad issues.
I see. Okay. And I know you're getting to the fire.
Yeah, so what we have is this mating scene. Mating happens in the middle of summer. Plants flower, usually starting at the end of June. Sometimes it's mid-June, sometimes it's in July. The prescribed burns happen usually in spring, like often in May, but sometimes in April. Sometimes they'll happen in the fall. But what the fires do is they induce flowering in the plants. And we don't know how it happens, but if you burn in the spring, the chances that an adult plant is going to flower that summer just like skyrockets.
It's killing me that we don't understand that, because I love fires. So I just want to know what it's doing.
I know. I want to know too.
Yeah, I bet you want to know.
I mean, is it like what you do with your flaxseed in the morning with your breakfast when you're heating it up? Is it taking something off that needs to, I don't understand.
There are a number of hypotheses about what could be going on. It could be that when you burn, that there's more light, and so the plants sense that there's more light, and they just say, "Oh, let's flower this year."
Competition has kind of been burnt down in
Yeah.
terms of light. Okay.
Yeah, because there's usually in the prairie lots of duff on the ground in the after a growing season, and if you burn it, then it's like bare soil. Also, you get black, which absorbs light and heat. It gets heated, so maybe it makes the plants think, "Oh, I should flower." It could be that there's some nutrients that were in the plant material that gets in the ground. It could be that. It could be the smoke. The smoke has lots of chemicals in it that might serve as like hormones to the plants.
Love
and
that.
It says, flower this year. We don't know.
How can you separate all of those elements because they're all part of fire?
Right, you have to do experiments.
Okay.
So
Like a smokeless fire? I don't know.
Well, you could do fireless smoke.
Oh, that's true.
We did that actually. We got some Wright's hickory smoke, which you can buy. It's a food service thing. You just buy it from Amazon, and we applied that to some echinacea plants in the fall and spring to see if the smoke would induce them to flower. And we randomly assigned them to either get smoke or no smoke, and
How'd that pan out?
nothing, no difference.
I mean, for me, looking at it from the outside in a non-scientific brain, I think complexity, of course, it's everything. But as a scientist, it is really important to understand these individual elements. It's what helped us understand that the world was round
Yeah, exactly.
and that we're going around the sun. Yeah.
So we would like to burn more, but burns are dangerous, expensive, timing's tough. So wouldn't it be nice if we could do something that simulated a burn without having to actually do the burn?
Okay, I'm sorry, but going back to the smoke, you're not talking about liquid smoke.
Liquid smoke, yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah, you can buy it in a gallon.
Okay, but what about
Because
with
of chemical stuff
beekeepers?
is what you're looking at.
Yeah.
Beekeepers, they use smoke.
Yeah, that's going to be our next
Oh, it is?
experiment. We're going to try and use that.
That's so funny. I used to buy liquid smoke, in college to try to beef up the flavor of my rare culinary experiments.
Wow.
Yeah.
We all do college differently.
Haven't used it since.
Yeah. So
Okay.
what the fires do is it induces plants to flower. So if you have a bunch of adult plants in a non-burn year, maybe 15%, 10%, 20% will flower. If you burn in the spring, maybe 70 or 80% will flower. So right after a fire, the mating scene is amazingly different. There's many more participants in the mating scene after a fire.
And do you want to see that? Like we were talking about, like optimization, blah, blah, blah. Is it necessary to see that kind of output every year? Or is it okay to let these plants chill out and do a...
Well, I don't know if it needs to be every year, but it needs to happen sometime, because if it doesn't happen, then the plants don't produce seed and you don't get the next generation of plants. Okay. These mating scenes kind of characterize loneliness.
Wah, wah.
One of the sad things about the prairie is that a lot of times these days, plants are lonely and isolated. They don't have many potential mates nearby. Those mates might be incompatible because they're related. And just by bad luck, they may not be flowering at the same time. So we'd say that that's a bad mating system, and it's, if you wanted one word to characterize it, it'd be lonely. So if you do a burn, you do get like all this mating, all this pollination, and you get lots of seeds, and that is essential for the next generation in a prairie.
And historically, going back to native populations living here long before settlers, Europeans came, were they burning regularly?
Yeah, Native Americans burned prairies regularly, maybe every 1, 2, or 3 years. It was very common. That was part of their, managing their land. Like after European colonization, we changed it. We stopped burning, we started plowing, we did a lot of things differently.
Thinking back about, you had mentioned before about the plant's embryo. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So each head produces, a bunch of these fruits, like about 150. Each floret produces a fruit, and when you look at them, you can't tell whether there's an embryo in there or not. So if it was pollinated, the floret will have an embryo. If it wasn't pollinated, it will be empty. And so one of the big things we do in our lab, and this is we're doing all winter long, is first of all counting how many fruits were produced on the heads, because there's a lot of variation in the number of fruits. But we're also trying to figure out how well was each head pollinated. And so it's not easy, because each fruit, they all look the same, kind of. We have an X-ray machine. We take a random sample of fruits and X-ray them. And under the X-ray, you can see they're either empty, didn't get pollinated, or they're full, and you can see that embryo. That's a seed. And so that's pretty cool. We have like huge amount of variation. In good mating scenes, and there's lots of plants flowering, and they're flowering synchronously, and they're all compatible. We have like 95% of the fruits are full. It's like, wow. But sometimes the mating system is bad. Either there weren't very many plants, or they were incompatible with each other, or they didn't flower at the right time. If a mating scene is bad, we might have 5% full. And we can see that in the X-ray images.
Is this like a specialized plant embryo scanner?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. We have 2 devices. One is the flatbed scanner that we use for counting fruits, and that's just like a regular old scanner. For the X-ray, that is a cabinet X-ray machine that is used in labs for animals and plants, but also like things, like looking in watches or other things. I don't really know.
But is there a reason why you can't do this without a machine?
We can weigh them. That is really labor intensive.
Oh my God.
Like that, we have this, high precision balance where we can individually load individual fruits and weigh each one.
They're just so small. You're not going to see these visually without this machine.
No. When I was in grad school and had very little, resources, I did the push test, which is I got a dull pencil and I moisten the fruits and I push with that. And if they're full, I can't push. And if they're empty, they just get flattened. But now we have the X-ray machine, and that is fantastic. We have this, pipeline of echinacea fruits going through like you would not believe, millions.
I have one final question for
Yeah.
you, which is, okay, you've been following echinacea for, let's do the math. So you're coming up on your 30th anniversary of studying this plant next year.
Oh my gosh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so I guess that is very interesting. You have been in it for the long haul with echinacea, right?
Yeah.
What retains your interest year over year? Like, what do you find really gratifying about this?
Oh, that's a great question. Every year we do something new. We also do something the same. We've been doing every year, but I work with great folks, people who are concerned and interested in conserving plants or bees or both. So a big part of this project is mentoring scientists, young people, which is great. Another big part is advancing science, and we do that every year. We have new findings every year. Some of them are incremental steps forward, and some of them are really big, exciting new results. So that's exciting. And then we actually, every experiment we do, we like improve the landscape because we do burns, we plant native plants, and so we do good work. We leave it better than when we started, so that's gratifying.
Do you publish this somewhere?
Oh yeah.
People can read about it?
Oh yeah, that's, I wouldn't have my job if we didn't publish results, yeah.
Where do they find it?
Well, you can find the papers linked on our website. So we have a website, echinaceaproject.org.
Okay.
And we have a field blog, where I love telling my students, just flog it. So we have a flog where we post findings and antics and activities that we do all season long. And you can find updates on our experiments.
I saw some of those blog posts. They were pretty funny, like finding a frog and putting it in your pocket, and various things happen. So curious if you would be willing to do a plant reveal with us for this episode.
You bet.
Okay, we are ready.
Plant reveal by Stuart.
So I'm thinking of a species that is a highly desirable plant to have in native prairies.
Is this like 20 questions for native plants?
Ooh, 20
I'm
might be
thinking
too many.
of.
Yeah, I'll do a couple. Maybe not 20.
Okay.
So this is a widespread species, but you only find it in high quality prairies. People who are doing restorations, like who want to plant a new prairie, like take an agricultural field and put it in, they really want these seeds, but the seeds are really hard to get. And even if you plant the seeds, they're unlikely to grow. And we here at the Botanic Garden try and grow the seeds, get them to germinate, and it is really, really difficult. Like germination rates are like 1%.
Oh, wow.
So this species is a hemiparasitic plant, which means that it is partially parasitic. So it has photosynthesis, so it can get nutrients from the sun, but it can also get nutrients through its roots. Its roots will grow into the roots of neighboring plants and suck them for their nutrients.
Does that affect the other plants?
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So one of the big questions in biology is it good to have, or why is it good to have these hemiparasitic plants in a prairie? Is it just that they come along in nice prairies, you happen to have them present, or do they make the prairie good? And one of the hypotheses is that these plants will suppress the dominant grasses so that other plants can get a foothold.
Oh, interesting. You think they're selective about their parasitic qualities?
It could be.
Huh.
Well, they may go for the most robust, the biggest plants. Like, wouldn't you if you were a parasite?
Sure, right.
Yeah.
Nice.
So this species is called Commandra umbellata. So Commandra umbellata is the Latin name. Commandra has something to do with hairs on the flower. And then umbellata is the shape of the inflorescence. And they flower in early spring, and they spread, they have extensive root systems. Their fruits are drupes, which is like a miniature plum or peach, kind of like those, but like way small, like the size of a pea or something like that. And I've heard that you can eat them, but I've not done it myself.
So far, the Latin name sounds very superhero-like.
It does.
Commandra
Yeah.
umbellata.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
totally superhero.
Picturing, a great belt and some
Right,
whips.
with little droops on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we love this plant, and it may have superheroic properties.
Yeah.
Really?
And what is the common name, did you
Oh
say?
yeah, it's not so superheroic. It's bastard toadflax.
My nickname is Bastard Toeflax.
Oh, I never thought of it. That's
That's a backstory for superheroes. They always have these backstories.
They
you
do.
know?
Okay, so what's up with Bastard
Yeah,
Toeflax?
yeah.
Oh,
What is
bastard
that?
toadflax.
Because Bastard and Commandra, are those connected?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so you know what flax is? Flax is a common plant in Europe. So then there's toadflax, which is a weed in flax seed. So toad means contemptible, so contemptible flax. And then this species, Commandra, grows in Europe, actually. And so bastard, in this case, means just like differently shaped or unusual. So it doesn't relate to what is bastard like?
Yeah. There's a negative connotation.
Negative connotation.
But, the idea is like, let's, de-shame that name, right? Like,
Yeah.
it just means different.
Different from the weed.
Yeah.
Bastard toadflax is widespread in North America, but there's also a subspecies that grows around the Mediterranean.
Huh. Wow.
Yep.
So it's a very old plant. I mean, does that mean when everything was connected? I mean, how do we get
At some time
that
in
here
the-
and then?
At some time in the distant past, it was connected. Yeah.
Can you, if it's hard to grow these from seed, can you transplant them?
I don't know. Although
Or is that a bad idea?
Yeah,
Take
you
it
don't
from
wanna
one
be-
and
around in the Midwest, we should definitely not be digging it up because it's really precious. But in the mountains of the West, it's a different subspecies, but they grow in really gravelly soil, and the roots are extensive, and they're harvested by Native Americans who use them for medicinal purposes. And I've heard that they can pull a root and keep pulling and pulling and pulling and get these really long roots. But they're growing it not in soil, it's more like gravel. Yeah.
Yeah, what a cool plant doing subterfuge.
Commandeering other plants with its parasitic tendencies.
Yeah, it's pretty sneaky, but mysterious.
Yeah.
Stuart, thank you for taking time out of your busy day of science to communicate this information to us.
Yeah, totally. This has been really, really fascinating. Thank you.
Hey, you bet. It's been my pleasure.